Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. One decision, one word, and suddenly an empire crumbles. For Caitlin Clark, revenge wasn't about firing shots on social media or snapping back in interviews. Her revenge was devastatingly simple. She said no. No to Geno Auriemma. No to UConn's legacy. No to the million-dollar offer that came crawling back to her years later. Like I said earlier, they actually had odds that, she was like third or fourth in the betting odds to be MVP of the WNBA. That's such a slap in the face to every WNBA player. It's unbelievable, right? On paper, it looked absurd. Who walks away from over $1 million for just 8 weeks of basketball? But this wasn't just a contract. It was the lifeline of a man who once dismissed her, belittled her, and treated her like an afterthought. When Clark rejected it, she didn't just pass on a paycheck. She humbled the man who never thought he could be humbled. That's the worst part about new fans. That they have no perspective. They have there's no context. So, they just say ridiculous nonsense. And that's what makes this story bigger than basketball. It isn't just about points, assists, or trophies. It's about power. For decades, Geno Auriemma was the gatekeeper of women's basketball. The coach who decided who mattered, who got the spotlight, and who faded into obscurity. But Caitlin Clark flipped that script. She didn't need his approval, his program, or his checkbook. She built her empire without him. And when he finally reached out, she turned him away with the kind of quiet authority that says, "I don't need you. You need me." Every revenge story starts with a mistake. Geno's wasn't a blown play or a bad timeout. It was arrogance. Pure blinding arrogance. Before Clark became the face of the sport, before the sold-out arenas and record-shattering TV ratings, she was just a kid with a dream. She admitted it openly. UConn was the coolest place on earth. The dynasty, the empire, the home of Terrace, Moore, Stewart, the mountaintop of women's basketball. For a girl growing up in Iowa, there was nothing bigger. And when recruitment time came, the path seemed obvious. The most electrifying talent of her generation, pairing with the greatest recruiter the game had ever known. But the call never came. Geno never picked up the phone, never called Clark, never called her parents, barely even sent a message through her AU coach. For the greatest recruiter of all time, that silence was deafening. And it wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. The message was clear. She wasn't their priority. His excuse, UConn had already locked in Paige Bueckers, and he didn't want two-point guards. On the surface, fine. But then came the insult. Geno suggested that if Clark really wanted UConn, she should have called him. Think about that. The coach who built his legacy on spotting once-in-a-generation talent years before anyone else decided Caitlin Clark wasn't worth the effort, then blamed a teenager for not chasing him. That wasn't just a recruiting miss. It was disrespect, the kind you don't forget. And in return, Clark quietly filed it away. If Geno didn't believe in her, she'd go somewhere that did. So, she chose Iowa, a program without UConn's banners, mystique, or dynasty glow. To many, it looked like a consolation prize. But for Clark, it was liberation. At Iowa, she wasn't Paige's shadow. She wasn't Geno's afterthought. She was the recruit, the one who would carry the program. And from the second she laced up in Iowa City, she rewrote the script. Her logo 3ES weren't just shots, they were statements. Her sold-out arenas weren't just crowds, they were proof. Her record-shattering TV ratings weren't flukes, they were receipts. Every basket, every viral highlight, every broken record was a reminder. You missed this. Meanwhile, Geno doubled down. Instead of humility, he leaned on arrogance. He brushed her off with condescending sound bites, calling her a kid playing like she's in the driveway. Instead of acknowledging her as a generational force, he tried to shrink her brilliance into something ordinary. But ordinary doesn't sell out Madison Square Garden. Ordinary doesn't drag the WNBA into mainstream relevance. Ordinary doesn't cost you millions. And that's where the irony bites deepest. Geno closed the door when Caitlin Clark knocked. He thought she'd fade into just another good player. Instead, she built the biggest empire women's basketball has ever seen without him. And when he finally circled back, contract in hand, Clark didn't rage. She didn't gloat. She simply said no. And that one word cost him more than a championship loss ever could. Geno Auriemma just couldn't help himself. Anytime Caitlin Clark's name came up, he found a way to drag her back into Paige Bueckers' comparisons. If Clark was fearless, well, Paige was too. If Clark was connecting with fans, so had Paige. It wasn't random. It was strategy. By tethering Clark's rise to his chosen players, Geno kept himself in the spotlight. He wanted the world to believe her success was nothing new, nothing separate from the dynasty he built. But backhanded compliments were thin, and people noticed, fans noticed, analysts noticed, other coaches noticed. They saw through the act. Clark's brilliance didn't need qualifiers. She was drawing bigger crowds than most professional franchises, breaking records the sport had never seen, and rewriting the conversation around women's basketball. Yet, there was Geno, smiling for the cameras while subtly clinging to his throne. Behind the charm was insecurity, the kind that comes when the spotlight is moving away and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And eventually the mask slipped. The sly digs weren't enough anymore. Geno went from undermining Clark to outright attacking the people who supported her. For months, his strategy had been shade disguised as commentary. Then in June 2024, during an interview on The Dan Patrick Show, he crossed a line he could never walk back. The Hall of Fame coach, the man who was supposed to represent the pinnacle of women's basketball, didn't just question Caitlin Clark. He went after her fans. The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on what are like she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP of the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning. His words weren't subtle. He called her supporters delusional. He said they didn't understand the game. And then unbelievably, he claimed they were so clueless they were damaging women's basketball itself. What crime had they committed? Believing Clark could finish top for an MVP voting as a rookie. To Geno, that wasn't passion. It was stupidity. And Diana said it best. This kid's in for a rude awakening. Think about that for a second. Millions of new eyes had just flooded into women's basketball because of Clark. Families were showing up in jerseys. Kids were camping out to meet her. Casual fans were tuning into WNBA broadcast for the first time ever. And Geno's response wasn't gratitude, wasn't celebration, but insult. Instead of welcoming the wave of new energy, he mocked it. This wasn't analysis. This wasn't a coach breaking down strengths and weaknesses.